Welcome back to Investing Talk podcast. We're going to take a closer look at Castellum CTM.
Hmm.
They're in that tech services space,
Right.
cybersecurity, IT solutions. They do a lot of work in some pretty important industries.
Yeah. Critical industries.
Exactly. And, you send over some information about their performance and
Oh, yeah.
what their potential might be.
Mm-hmm.
So kind of our mission here is to dig into that
Absolutely.
and figure out, what stands out, what are the key things to know.
We've got a really interesting mix of information here.
Yeah.
We've got obviously the stock performance and how it's been trading.
Mm-hmm.
We've also got some recent financials and then some pretty significant developments in terms of what the company's been up to.
Yeah.
So we'll synthesize all of that together to get a clearer picture for you listening.
Okay. So let's jump right in to some of that recent stock activity.
Sure.
So right now it's sitting at $1.23. Over the last 10 days, it has been up 6 of those days, but it did see a 1.23% drop just in the last day. So what's your initial takeaway from that?
Well, the first thing that jumps out is that short-term volatility, right? So 6 days up out of the last 10
Yeah.
suggests some positive upward momentum.
Mm-hmm.
But then that slight dip on the last day is a reminder that, market sentiment can shift pretty quickly.
Right.
And while 1.23% isn't a massive drop in itself, it's something to note in the broader context of everything else that's happening.
And talking about shifts and, things moving quickly, we've also seen some pretty significant movement within individual trading days recently.
Absolutely.
With a recent high-low difference of 7.63%. That's a pretty bumpy ride.
Yeah, if you think about the bigger picture, that level of intraday volatility often signals uncertainty in the market. Maybe some speculative trading happening.
Sure.
It basically tells us that investors are divided in their opinions on where they think the price is going to go in the short term.
And then here's an interesting little detail. The trading volume on the last day actually decreased.
Okay,
Now, why is that potentially something to pay attention to?
that's a great question. Because lower trading volume can signal a couple of things. Sometimes, after a significant price move, lower volume can suggest that the momentum behind that move is starting to fade. In this case, following a period of general price increases, the lighter volume on a down day could indicate that the selling pressure isn't all that strong. However, and this is important to note,
Yeah.
if we had seen decreasing volume during recent price increases, that could have actually been an early warning sign that the rally wasn't as strong as it seemed and might not last.
Oh, interesting. Okay. So already we're seeing some mixed signals here.
Definitely.
Let's talk about some of the technical indicators and what they're showing us. So we've got buy signals coming from both the short and long-term moving averages, which is generally seen as a good sign, right?
Yeah, typically.
But then the MACD is flashing a sell signal. So how do we make sense of these different indicators and the different signals that they're giving us?
Well, this is a perfect example of why you don't want to rely on just one indicator in isolation when you're looking at these things.
Right.
Moving averages, because they track the average price over a certain period of time.
Mm-hmm.
They help smooth out the day-to-day fluctuations.
Right.
They give you a sense of the overall trend. It's kind of like if you imagine a river. Instead of focusing on every little ripple, you're looking at the general direction of the flow,
Mm-hmm.
and those buy signals from the moving averages suggest a more established upward trend.
Yeah.
Now, the MACD, on the other hand, is more like a speed gauge
Okay.
for the stock's momentum.
Get it.
So even though we're seeing that longer-term upward trend suggested by the moving averages,
Right.
that sell signal on the FCD suggests that the upward momentum might be slowing down or even getting ready to reverse.
So long-term trend versus sort of the immediate speed.
Exactly.
Okay. And then what about these support levels that we're seeing
Yeah.
at $1.18, $1.10, and $1.08? What is the significance of those particular price points?
Well, think of those levels as kind of like potential floors for the stock price.
Mm-hmm.
Historically, when the prices dropped to those levels in the past, there has been enough buying interest there to either stop the decline or even push the price back up.
Okay.
So if we see the stock price drop below one of those support levels, it could mean that previous buying support has weakened, and we might see more selling pressure come in as investors start to lose confidence.
Interesting. So given all these signals we're seeing, the volatility, the recent dip, those conflicting technical indicators, probably not a huge surprise that the current analyst recommendation is to hold.
Yeah, I would agree.
Basically, they're saying keep an eye on it and wait for clearer buy or sell signals to emerge. What's your thought on that sort of cautious approach?
I think it's a prudent stance, given all the mixed signals that we've been talking about.
Mm-hmm.
It's fascinating, isn't it? How
Yeah.
you can have, these positive signals from some of the longer term indicators,
Right.
but then also some short-term warning signs.
Yeah.
So I think a hold recommendation acknowledges that uncertainty
Right.
and basically advises investors to wait for a little more evidence before making a move. It,
Yeah.
it recognizes that underlying potential we mentioned while also acknowledging the immediate risks highlighted by the technicals.
So all that gives us a pretty good picture of the stock itself. But
Mhm.
I think that there's more to the story here. So let's shift gears a little bit, talk
Yeah.
about the company itself. So Castellum CTM, cybersecurity, IT solutions, intelligence analysis, and they're working in some pretty major sectors: defense, healthcare, finance. That sounds like a pretty strong foundation.
It does. If you think about just in terms of the broader economy, those are sectors that typically see consistent demand and often growing demand regardless of what's happening in the overall economic climate.
Right.
Cybersecurity in particular is an area it's constantly expanding,
Right.
right? As more and more businesses and organizations need to protect their data and their systems.
Absolutely. And one significant recent development for them is that their subsidiary, GTMR, was awarded a CMMI Level 3 appraisal. Now, for those who may not know, what is that exactly, and why is that such a big deal?
Okay, so this is where things get really interesting.
Okay.
When you look at companies that do business with the government, CMMI stands for Capability Maturity Model Integration. And it's essentially a framework that organizations can use to improve their processes, make them more efficient, more reliable. And achieving a level 3 appraisal, that's basically a stamp of approval.
No.
It indicates that GTMR's processes are well-defined, they're documented, and they're being used consistently across the whole organization.
Got it.
Now, why this matters so much for a company that works with the government is that government agencies often look for, and sometimes even require, this kind of certification
Oh.
when they're awarding contracts. It gives them confidence that GTMR has a proven track record
Hmm.
of using mature, reliable processes, which makes them a much more attractive, less risky choice for important government projects. So it really gives them an edge over their competitors.
So it sounds like it could really open some significant doors for them in the future.
It could, yeah.
And then Castellum also recently raised $4.5 million
Okay.
through a public offering. They sold 4,500,000 units at $1 per unit. Each unit included a share of their common stock and then what's called a warrant to buy another share at $1.08 in the future.
Right.
How significant is that cash infusion for them?
It's a pretty big deal, especially when you look at their cash position at the end of last year. So they went from having just 1.8 million in cash at the end of 2023 to 12.3 million
Wow.
at the end of 2024. So that gives them a much larger financial cushion, which is obviously always a good thing.
Right.
And that capital can be used for all sorts of things, investing in research and development, expanding their operations, maybe even acquiring other companies. So it strengthens their financial position significantly.
Okay. And let's look at their financial performance for 2024. So while their revenue actually decreased just slightly from 45.2 million in 2023 down to 44.8,
Right.
their operating loss improved significantly, going from 16.7 million down to 7.2 million. What's our takeaway from that?
Well, I think what that tells us is that they're becoming much more efficient in how they're running their business. Even though revenue dipped a tiny bit, the fact that their operating loss, which is basically the money they lost from their core business operations, decreased so much indicates that they've gotten better at managing their expenses relative to the revenue they're bringing in.
So even though they sold, slightly less,
Right.
they've become more efficient in terms of how they run the business.
Exactly.
That's a good sign. Now, looking ahead, the current outlook is that the stock price could decrease by about 3.21% over the next 3 months.
Okay.
But the range of predictions is quite wide, going from a low of just 33.5 cents all the way up to $2.42.
Wow, that's a huge range.
So what does that tell us?
I think that really underscores the amount of uncertainty surrounding this stock.
Yeah.
Those analyst predictions are trying to take into account all those mixed signals that we've been discussing.
Right.
But the fact that the range is so wide suggests that there's no real consensus on where the stock is headed. And it also tells us that the price could be very sensitive to any new developments or news that comes out, whether it's positive or negative.
Mm-hmm.
And you add to that the very high volatility we've seen recently. I mean, averaging almost 14% over the past week.
Wow.
And that just adds another layer of unpredictability.
So despite all that volatility, there's a potential investment thesis here, right?
Right.
Some investors are looking at Castellum CTM and thinking that it might be undervalued, especially when you consider that strong position they have in the government contracting space and just the fundamental strength of their business.
Yeah.
And those recent developments, the CMMI Level 3 appraisal, their selection as a SCI amosite vendor seem like they could be some pretty key growth drivers.
And that's where you see that potential long-term story of the company clashing with some of those shorter-term worries about the stock's price movements.
Yeah.
What's interesting to me is that potential upside, right?
Yeah.
If they can really capitalize on those government contracts, it seems like maybe the market hasn't fully priced in the value of those developments yet, which is why some investors are seeing it as potentially undervalued.
So given everything we've talked about, especially that high volatility and
Right.
those mixed signals from the technical analysis,
Mm,
it sounds like anyone who's considering investing here should probably think about using a stop loss strategy to kind of manage their risk.
that's a really good point.
Mm-hmm.
When you have this much price movement, a stop-loss order can be a valuable tool.
Yeah.
It's a way to automatically sell your shares if the price drops below a certain level that you set. And it can help you limit your potential losses if the stock moves against you in a way that you don't expect.
Yeah. So putting it all together with Castellum CTM, you've got these really positive developments happening with their business, particularly in getting those government contracts. But you've also got those short-term signals that are suggesting some caution
Right.
because of that price volatility and those sell signals. And, the recent public offering definitely strengthened their financial position. But what that stock price is going to do in the near future, well, it's still a bit of a question mark.
Absolutely.
And that's clear from that huge range of price predictions.
Yeah, it's really interesting to see that contrast, isn't it?
Mhm.
Between that potential for long-term growth,
Right.
which is driven by their strategic positioning in these key industries,
Right.
and then that unpredictable short-term stock behavior.
Yeah.
It really highlights how important it is to consider both the fundamentals of the company and then the technical analysis of the stock itself when you're trying to decide whether or not to invest.
Absolutely. So hopefully this has given everyone listening a more informed perspective on Castellum CTM. And we definitely encourage you to do your own further research and think about what these signals might mean for your own investing approach.
And if you find this helpful,
Yeah?
subscribe to the podcast, like this episode, and leave a comment.
Yeah. We always appreciate hearing from you.
We do.
And thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
We'll see you next time.
See you later.